Good evening and welcome to the Velocity of Now with me, your host Thomas Sheridan. It's just gone past 11 p.m. GMT Irish time, that's 6 p.m. Eastern time in the USA and Canada, or the East Coast anyway, and it's the 16th of September 2015. I hope you're all keeping well. My website is www.thomassheridanarts.com, and there's lots of new articles there, particularly on the link that goes to the Triskel and the Dragon blog, and a few of the new things there I hope you will enjoy. This will be my last show for a couple of weeks. I'm nothing wrong, I just have to go off. I'm helping somebody move, so I'm making a little bit of an adventure out of it. And well, I hope you're all keeping well, and thank you for continuing to send me the dream data. There hasn't been anything showing up lately, although there's water is appearing, but water appears very commonly in dreams. But I haven't forgotten about it, and it's great that so many are still doing it. And no matter what, I'm still copying and pasting into the database, so nothing is getting lost. So every dream story you tell me is valuable and building up what I think will be a phenomenal archive, and it will give us something that we can look back on in maybe 6 months or a year and probably blow our minds. That's if it hasn't already blown our minds already. Now, tonight I want to talk about spirituality. Now, spirituality is something that most people should be very wary of, because it's one of those terms like love, like happiness, that it's thrown around with the automatic assumption that everyone has a right to it, or that everyone can do it if they practice it correctly, or if they go about certain methods by altering their personality, usually in a compromise type situation, that they will become spiritual. And like things like love, people go through lives believing that they will be told that they will have this amazing experience of love. Well, that doesn't always happen, everybody, and that's okay. A lot of that stuff has been programmed into people's heads, and then some people go through life at the same time thinking they're going to have an enormous spiritual experience. And guess what? A lot of us don't. But here's something. I don't think I have ever had a spiritual experience of the way I hear people talk about them. Like I've had, the emotional kind of overcoming upon viewing a beautiful sunset, or going into a particular megalithic stone circle, or it's like I was in Stonehenge, but it wasn't overwhelming. I was very much in the zone at the same time. I wasn't captivated in an epiphany. I've never had that experience that so many people talk about. No, I think the nearest I had to was probably when I was 14. I went to see AC/DC over 2 nights in the Olympic Ballroom in Dublin. And that was more of a kind of a shamanic experience, because it was the first time, and being so young, being at a live concert with a very loud band, people screaming and dancing and huge noise, that gave me a kind of a transformative effect, which is why loud rock music and dancing and all that stuff is very important, drumming and so on. The reason why I've never had that overwhelming spiritual experience is because it's really quite simple. I'm there all the time. I'm not going from 0 to 100. And that's what happens to those people that have those 0 to 100 spiritual experiences. They're kind of flatliners. They're spiritual flatliners for most of their lives. And that's not saying anything wrong with them. I mean, this is all our lives develop differently, and we're all agents of fortune and victims of circumstance. But this is not a spiritual experience in the sense that it's meaningful. Because if it was meaningful, you would already be at the 50 mark and you would notice a rise, and it would not be so powerful. And that lack of it being so powerful is telling you that you're already at a level of what they call being spiritual. Now, in this age of today, mainly as a result of Christianity and other religions like Islam, particularly Sufism, there's this belief that a spiritual state of being is rooted in calmness. This came out of in cults like the Essenes in Palestine 2,500 years ago. Well, no, sorry, 2,100 years ago. And this idea, like the whirling dervish, that you must be in a state of grace. Well, that's not a spiritual state at all. That is a pure myth. That is a transcendental state, and it's a very different thing because the word says it. You're in a trance. A true spiritual state, you are fully cognitively aware. You're in the moment. You've got your faculties and your senses in control. And I'm going to teach you tonight how to do this. I know this sounds very pretentious, but take it from me, I'm quite a successful person in everything I've ever done in my life. Anything I've ever put myself to with my heart in it, I've been generally very successful in it. And that's not because I'm better than anyone else. That's not because I'm clever more than anyone else. It's not because I'm more devious and shifty than anyone else. It's because I'm in control of my faculties while I'm in that situation. If I was on a battlefield, I would be using all my senses behind me, in front of me, and knowing when to retreat, and knowing when to advance, knowing when to defend, and knowing when to attack. This is how you would give yourself a better chance of survival. Well, your psyche works precisely the same way. You have to know how to attack and when to attack, and you have to know how to retreat and fall back. Now, this show will surprise you tonight. It'll go a few different places, but please bear with me because I'm giving you something that I think many of you will find very valuable. It's something I've thought about quite a lot in the last 5 years, especially being on social media so much. It has been a phenomenal laboratory for me to measure how warfare happens in the modern age. Now let's go back to previous times, say 1,000 years ago or more. If a person could not meditate when there was a danger of having someone come up behind you and chopping your head off, they would not even meditate. They may go on walks in the woods. They may commune with nature. They may commune with the stars. And they would even go into a shamanic state of drumming and so on. But they'd make sure to have somebody around them protected. A shamanic headdress of a deer antlers cap was found in Stonehenge, which proves that we did have shaman in this part of the world. But I can guarantee you, like shaman anywhere else in those times, there was armed people around them to keep them safe. They were not peace daddy-o hippies. Some of you may know Swami. He's on the Type 1 show on the Bong, and he has his own show. He's a member of a group, a Vedic group, and they meditate. They're like a martial arts thing, and that's what he came out of. And what they do is the gurus and the swamis meditate, but if they have to get up and kick the shit out of someone, they do. When you have things like transcendental meditation, promoting this idea of just meditating because it makes you spiritual, Have you noticed that all the people who do this will come on your Facebook page, or you'll have an argument with them in real life, and they'll tell you how the transcendental, the TM as they call it, that's very cult when they start using abbreviations or acronyms. The TM has made them more relaxed and a better, more spiritual person. You'll also find that they can be the most despicably and disgusting and nauseating passive-aggressive types there is. That's because the aggression still has to come out. The aggression still has to manifest itself. And because aggression is spiritual, what do you think ninjas wear? What do you think all these other sects wear? You had all these warrior groups, even the berserkers. We're dynamic beings. We're not all about going om and lying there. See, so what happens when they do their transcendental meditation? They get up and there's no dynamic action. They get up from that state and then they go drink a cup of herbal tea and listen to a Windham Hill or Indigo Girls CD, and their brain turns to absolute mush. It's not like that. That is not spirituality. That is bullshit. There's an element of condescension in all this, that if you do not reach the right levels of meditation or reach a certain... I remember I even tried that 1 year ago when I tried meditation. I was obsessed with getting into the zone. And then I realized that was a kind of an examination, like passing an exam. Oh, look, I meditated like a motherfucker. I shut my neural brain off and then I got into the zone. It's a competition then. And this leads to frustrations of the ones who don't get in it, and then you have the other ones who pretend they're in there. And that's why I don't like meditation just for the sake of meditation. I think it's much more helpful to go walking in the woods and things like that, art and music, and those things are much, much better. That's why this guy J.P. Sears, he's actually doing a lot of people a good favor. Although he's taking the piss and ripping the mickey out of the New Agers and the fake spiritual people with his whole ultra-spiritual stuff, there's tremendous wisdom in there too, if you notice, because he's more like a bardic druid in that using the conduit of satire, he's also bringing out some very profound and important truths. See, how you react to J.P. Sears' sketch is proves you're spiritual. So, for instance, the one where he made fun of marijuana being, the most wonderful medicine ever, and then he just gets wasted on the brownies, and the next thing they're eating snacks and munchies. Well, a truly spiritual person who maybe if they use marijuana and cannabis will look at that and go, oh, that's really funny because I've seen that, I've done that myself. Where a person who's no spirituality will instantly switch it off and say, I don't like him. Now, this is the druid way. This is the test. This is the nearest we can get to having ourselves tested. But ultimately, what tonight's talk is all about is about energy. Now, we hear a lot about energy. We hear about things like the quantum field, and we hear about things like the matrix and so on. Now, that's all very well and good, but it's also very deceiving because you have people who say things like, if we throw enough intention into the matrix, we will alter reality. There's absolutely no proof of this anywhere, ever. Zero. I can remember back in the 1980s, all the New Agers were talking about the age of grand convergence. I think it was 1987, and there was going to be a convergence of emotional and psychic energy into an idea that would bring world peace. And we've had Gulf War 1 and 2 since that. So it doesn't work. Now, it does work on an individual level, but as I've spoken about many times in my talks and radio shows, it happens usually as a result of trauma, and that's very important. And that's what we're going to be talking. This is why I make a big deal about trauma in people's lives, because a traumatic experience is a spiritual experience. I remember a few weeks ago I was at Stonehenge and Maria Wheatley said to me, Thomas, that's really what you're about, trauma. And I says, yes, Maria, because understanding trauma, both at the social, the psychic, personal, and emotional level, is such a tremendous teacher, because our reaction to trauma, how we battle trauma, is the psychic warfare. It is just like our basic training. Now, the worst way you can deal with trauma, say you had a bad relationship or something, your husband ran away with the wife, the neighbor's wife, something like that. The worst way to deal with that is to ruminate upon it, because rumination just creates these feedback loops in your head, and those feedback loops continue to recirculate, and then your neural pathways in your brain are wired permanently, and you can't break the cycle. It's actually extremely cognitively dangerous. This is why support groups and all this kind of idea is okay at first, but then you must immediately discard it. It's like morphine when you're in pain. If the doctor keeps giving you morphine, you will die. The initial pain has to be addressed in a different way, or healing must take place. You cannot keep injecting a person who's in pain indefinitely with morphine, because they will overdose and die. You have to treat the pain at the source and not at the end game. And the energy wars and works the same way. Now, the first step to being a spiritual badass is very, very important. It's the idea of a psychic firewall. You have heard me talking about this for ages, forever. The idea of the psychic firewall, that you have a psychic wall around yourself and you must protect it at all costs. When you do this and when you manage this, this will bring you up to a phenomenal level within your state of spiritual operational potential. Now, I'll give you a very good example of how that can go terribly wrong and how to make it terribly right. And also, it's a good example of how these energy wars exist. Now, as you know, for years I have been telling you about no contact ever again. If you engage with a person who's of a toxic or a psychic vampiric or a pathological psychopathic or extremely taxing on your psyche type individual, no contact ever again is the only way to deal with them. It's the only way. And people who say to me, well, how do I do that if one of them is my child, or I had a child with this person? Well, you know what? You should have thought twice before having a child or having a child with that person. It isn't my or anyone else's job to clean up your personal decisions in life. If you had a child with this person who's a toxic, or you had a child who was toxic, that's a lesson to other people to take childbirth and parenting very, very seriously. And rather than saying, oh, you're such a saint, let me help you in this situation, I wasn't the one who asked you or told you to spread your legs. You weren't the one who got on top of her and impregnated her. So you can't be sitting there blaming it, saying that no contact ever again is no good because you're having to still deal with this person as a result of a child. You have essentially played into a mistake, and the only way to deal with it is to live with that and try to deal with it as best as possible. But that does not mean that the concept of, as a whole, of no contact ever again is not sound. Of all the things I've ever come up in my life with, I would say no contact ever again is easily the one thing. If I was asked to be remembered for one thing, it would be for that. Because that is the ultimate expression of an energy firewall. Now, to show you how powerful and how incredible no contact ever again is, I've been reading a lot about this phenomena called ghosting. Now, ghosting is a very strange new phenomenon. It's been around for a while, but basically it involves women. It's not involved with men. It's involved women on every case. And what happens is these women have been in a relationship with a man, and in 90% of the cases, the relationship broke up because of something the woman did. She ran off with another guy. She told him that the relationship wasn't working out anymore. She broke it off a week before the wedding. He wasn't the right guy. He came home and found her with his best friend. In every case I've examined, it seems to be that the woman who's claiming to be a victim of ghosting has actually been the one who caused the heartbreak on the other person. Now, what makes this very interesting is the guy who has now, I know there's men and women are screwed up, but I'm just talking about the female version tonight, so don't get your knickers in a twist. The guy has gone no contact ever again. Not surprisingly, men feel broken hearts very, very different than a woman. And the way they can the best way for them to deal with it is to pull up the drawbridge and hide behind the wall and get on with their life as if the other person is dead. That's how men usually deal with heartbreak. It doesn't mean they don't have feelings. If anything, they probably have too much feelings. But they have to get away. So they implement no contact ever again to protect their psyche. Now, what's happening with these women is they meet another guy, they get married, they go on with their lives, and guess what? They start to go into deep trauma, suicidal depression, because the guy that they dumped or broke his heart, they can't contact him anymore. This is now going on for decades with some women. This idea of ghosting. There are now ghosting support groups. The New York Times has covered the issue of ghosting. And these women actually feel that they have been victimized. Now, this brings up a very interesting thing. If these women, it's also the reason why women say they hate, some women, not all women, I shouldn't say women, some women say they hate a guy, and then they spend all their time talking about the guy on their Facebook page. Even when they're slagging them off or putting the guy down, he still has power. And where this comes from is there's something inside them women, perhaps even an entity of some kind, a consciousness parasite, which craves the drama, which craves the flux of the energy, and craves the man to suck him like a succubus. But because the connection is broken through non-contact ever again, there's no feeding happening. There's no energy happening. And what happens then is they become neurotic and psychic, and psychotic, deeply depressed and near suicidal, because they can't change the situation for the simple reason they cannot manipulate the man anymore. And this seems to be a very recent thing. And it may be connected to the idea, it may be one of the first manifestations we're seeing, that the internet itself is becoming sentient, because these women are on the internet, and it could be the sentient aspects of the World Wide Web that's actually infecting them and making them like this. They have not, the men have learned in this situation, have learned to put up their psychic firewall by going no contact ever again. These women haven't, and look at the consequences for everybody. The idea of the idea of no contact ever again is seen as an attack offensive in the energy wars. It's not a retreat offensive, it's an attack offensive, because it works like negative and positive ends of a magnet. You can't put two negative ends of a magnet together, and you can't put two positive ends of a magnet together. It works like that. It's repelling the energy. It's like putting up a shield and brandishing your sword. That's the energy war. That's where I got the idea for no contact ever again. It was a technique in Slavic magic. And this ghosting thing shows how incredibly powerful it is, because you've actually stopped your energy from being bled. So that's lesson number 1 in how to be a spiritual badass. No contact ever again with toxic individuals and people who are trying to drain your energy. Because the more energy you can conserve, you're like a battery member, remember now. The more energy you can conserve, the stronger you will be in a spiritual sense. This is why the hippies all failed, because everything, and this is why the Christians want you to forgive. I must forgive. Because they want you, the priest and the minister and the pastor needs your psychic firewall ripped right open so he can tunnel his way into it and feed upon it like a vampire. That's why they want you to forgive. The Jews have a much better ceremony. Once a year they go to a river with pieces of bread, and all the indiscretions and hurt they caused others, they put into the piece of bread and they cast it into the river and float it down. It's very similar to some druidic ideas I will talk about later. Christianity is so dangerous. We would not have New Age or cults or Scientology or any of this shite if Christianity never came into the West. Now, the energy firewall is so important on the internet, and I'll tell you why. Let me explain to you right now what the most spiritual thing on the internet is. The most spiritual thing on the internet right now is not the Vatican website. No. It's not the Pleiadians. It's not any other flying saucer, New Age worship site, Saint Germain, all that bollocks. It's none of that. The most spiritual thing on the internet in today, brace yourself at this one, it's the block button in Facebook. The block button in Facebook is the most spiritual thing on social media. You know why? Because it stops your energy from being eaten out of you. As soon as I see someone acting the bollocks, especially passive aggression, bang, elimination, they don't exist. Then I'll have people who are still on their accounts watch these animals and report back to me and tell me the same thing over and over again. Because these inferiors, these energy maggots, are no longer able to feed upon me, they go into a rampage, a psychosis of frenzy, of hatred. That's a desperate need to get energy off me in any way they can, because they cannot get it directly from the source. Imagine if they were stealing. I had an orchard and they were stealing the apples, and I built a higher wall. They'd be trying to tunnel under to kill the tree, or going to the market and saying, don't eat those person's apples, because they can't derive the energy from them. They feel that no one else can. You can see the energy wars and the effect of no contact ever again. The block button as a sword is a weapon of offense when that process takes place. And my God, it is a beautiful thing. Every last one of you who ever did that to me, I savored your energy when you ran those hate campaigns and smear campaigns against me. I sat there and I allowed all that crazed energy that you tried to suck from me come pouring back to me. Come home to daddy, baby. Now, another thing with the internet, and this is becoming increasingly apparent, is the idea, I was talking to Mark tonight about this, is of the scrying mirror. You've heard me say this a while back. I announced to you that those big tablets like the iPad is identical to a scrying mirror. It has a black screen, like polished obsidian or water in a darkened pool. It has lights on either side, just like the candles in the Goetia, right? And you're staring into that. And it's not, you see, we still don't know fully what mirrors are. I know there's all kinds of mathematical formula to show you how a mirror works, how the reflective surface works, and refraction works, and so on. But still, a mirror is a very, very strange thing. Reflections are still very strange things, and they're still very unknown in many ways. If you stare into any mirror long enough, just stare at your own face, you will often see a different person looking back at you. You will see your face sometimes change into a monster. That could be an evolutionary process to make you hyper vigilant and run away from a predator, or it could be a monster looking back at you. Or some people, it's happened many people, including myself. You see either a giant pussycat or a lion face looking back at you. This is where the Gnostics got the idea of the Demiurge, the demon that runs the universe, pretending to be God, has a lion face, because they were obviously scrying down there in the mystery schools in Egypt 1,500 years ago. Now, all the mobile devices all have black screens now. All of them, every last one of them. The whole thing is a scrying mirror. You're at my Android, your iPhone, your iPad, your all of them. They all have it. Every last one of them. Okay, your Samsung Galaxy, they all have it. Now, there was a Russian scientist. Well, it's been known for a long time that mirrors have they have these paranormal effects. One of them is that if you measure the temperature on a concave mirror in a neutral environment, not with the sunlight that shine directly at it or a very bright halogen lamp shining at it, that the temperature, the air temperature on top of the surface of the concave mirror is different on the top rim of the mirror than you go towards the middle. There's a change in temperature. Now, initially, physicists thought this was caused by the light focusing in the center like a parabolic mirror, but that's not the focal point. The bottom of the mirror is not a focal point, so that theory was incorrect. They discovered eventually that what's actually happening is the mirror is actually taking the energy. So the mirror is not only absorbing light, it's not only collecting light, but it's also receiving and transmitting energy. And that's why when this is how people fall in love on the internet. This is how people are driven to suicide on the internet, because that black glass mirror is having changes in temperature. There was a Russian scientist. In fact, mirrors are so powerful. There was a Russian scientist called Kozyrev. And what he did was he came up with a mirror that was actually a spiral. It was a spiral-shaped piece of polished aluminium, about 6 foot tall, and he calculated the spiral. And when you went into that spiral and looked at the mirror at your reflection, it actually generated an electromagnetic field. You actually looking at your reflection in this spiral mirror was actually generating energy. It was you were acting almost like the magnet in a dynamo. Excuse me. Your magnetic field was transmitting outwards. Now, this is another reason why scrying came along, because scrying came along to see into the other world. You had like the oracles and all this kind of thing. But I was at a place called Grinon of Ailok. It's what they call a ring fort. I posted some pictures to Facebook. It's a giant circle on top of a hill in County Donegal, very close to the city of Derry. And it's only about 800 feet high, the hill, but the views around it are tremendous. You can see all around, but it's basically a stone circle in the sky, perfectly formed. Now, the experts have said it goes back to the 5th century, but they're wrong. Maybe that it was rebuilt in the 5th century, but it's much, much older. It was also, we can't fully tell, because there was a restoration of the circle, or what they call a ring fort, back in the 1870s, and they rebuilt it in how they imagined it should look, and they rebuilt it looking like a Middle Ages palisade. It looked like a castle from the medieval period. This thing was so that's what they made it look like that. But in reality, it didn't. It probably didn't look like that. But I explored this thing. I've counted the numbers of steps down into it. I think it was a gigantic scrying pool on top of the mountain. It had a purpose of. They also found that the lower edges was shielded. The lower stones at the bottom contained mica that was brought from far away. Now, this thing was useless as a defensive location. It was only 800 feet up on a hill that the lads back then could have easily climbed. And even in terms of its defensive walls, it's the easiest thing to throw a stone over, a rock, an arrow, anything you wanted. They wouldn't have a chance defending themselves up there. A siege would be pointless. It's not that big. It's about, if you got into two tennis courts on either end and drew them into a circle, that's about the size of it, the interior area. There also seems to be, the only part that's we can tell for certain is original. It's a very lower part, and there appears to be drainage channels, and I believe that they used to fill these things with water up on top of the mountain, and then the druids and the chieftains and the priests would stand around the circle of this pool, especially if there was a moon, and the moon was drawn down into the scrying pool, and then perhaps by throwing a stone into the center of the pool, the moon's energy would ripple in waves towards the outer circle, and it would actually charge not only the ones attending the ceremony, maybe there was a ritualistic thing to it, but also charge the landscape. And this would explain the mica. The mica was probably an insulator. Now, this shows how powerful the mirror is, potentially, and what you're looking at as a mirror. Now, when you this is why this thing wants your emotions. This is why we have all these people today in restaurants doing nothing but looking at their iPads and Androids, walking down the street. They have become enchanted. They are spellbound. The digital jinn, as I call it, on the other side has taken them. Now, when a stranger attacks you on the internet, have you ever thought that that may not be a human being? There's one to ponder. This is why the block button is so vital. The day that Facebook does away with the block button is the day to run off that feckin' thing. Get the hell off it. Because you will no longer have protection. You will no longer have the shield. So people are pouring their energies into it. And then there's also the parasites on the other side who create drama. Oh, they love drama. Drama's all energy. All energy. Drama, drama, drama. That's all that they're feeding. And they're people who can't create. I'm sorry, I'm coughing tonight. Let me get a drink here. It's been speculated in some quarters, and I believe it's true, that human beings developed into higher beings, and probably a higher level of cognition and consciousness was when they gave up cannibalism. This is why cannibalistic tribes, such as the ones in Indonesia and in Africa that have been existed into recent times, were shown to be incredibly primitive. They were spectacularly primitive. They were actually, in the 20th century, they were even more primitive than our ancient Stone Age ancestors. Cannibalism appears to completely destroy social development. But cannibals still exist. They exist as energy cannibals. They feed off other human beings' energy, psychic energy. And this is why these types always seem to be the same. They cannot create. They're useless at creation. They may try to pretend that they're some kind of poet or something, because poetry is the easiest thing for one of these Muppets to actually do. You can bluff very easily in poetry. You can write a few verses about me, and that makes you feel like you're poetic. No. A true artist has to develop their craft. Poetry is one thing that only few people can do well. The rest are all bluffers. But you can't bluff in painting. Either you can paint or you can't. Either you can play a musical instrument or you can't. Either you can dance or you can't. Either you can act or you can't. Either you can sing or you can't. There's an element of craft and development of craft. And that's why magic and magic ritual was called the craft. The art and the craft. There was an element of virtuosity that was developed over a slow period of time. It didn't happen overnight. And these ones who feed the cannibals, the cannibals of the electromagnetic spectrum, you'll always find they have feck all creativity in them. None. But they have to get that energy from somewhere. And so they create drama. They attack people. They lose their minds over nothing. They assault people. They develop vendettas to fill the empty soul, the empty hole inside them where their soul should be. Because when you have the soul, you're no longer hunting for energy. You've reached a baseline spiritual level and you're fine. You'll have ups, you'll have downs, but you're at a baseline level. That's what they mean by people who have, when they say, oh, he or she has her shit together. He or she has reached a baseline level of spirituality. They know when to fight when they have to fight. And they know when they have to run when they have to run. And they know how to have to retreat when they have to retreat. And sometimes they even have to surrender as a tactical surrender in order to survive. And that's okay. An example of a tactical surrender was when the druids were absorbed into the Christianity. This is why the druids never went away. Last month, I was in Oinagat Cave, a very, very spiritual place and a very important place in Irish history and mythology, which is literally just left as a hole in the ground. The original grand entrance is a sign. You have to literally crawl on your stomach and your back to get into it, go down a deep hole in the ground. But what do you find? You find the truth in the darkness. And right down there, I found an ogre. Well, I didn't find it, but I found a famous Ohm stone, and that said, Fikra, son of Maeve. That was written there by a druid. The druids invented the Ohm script as a coded message to allow them to survive and communicate in the Christian era. That's why, if any of you saw on my Facebook page this week, I posted a page of the Book of Ballymote. Ballymote's a town just up the road from here, where the Christians were frantically trying to decipher the Ohm script, as well as the Furtek, the younger Furtek of the Nordic runes, which I call Viking Ohm. They were extremely paranoid, like any new cult, of what the druids were whispering in the woodsheds. And down there, when I saw that stone, I realized in that moment that was a druid who had given me a message, all of us a message, maybe 1,000 years ago, saying that Fikra and Queen Maeve are not mythological beings. They were our real queens. They were really on this island. They actually existed. Because the druid who wrote that in stone, in Ohm script, was fully aware that at that moment, Christian monks were already drafting the history of Ireland Just like the Eddas were redrafted in Iceland as fairy tales and not the truths of our peoples, of our history and our tribes. They were consigned to fairy tales and made to fit into the Bible. And the Druids, in their ingeniousness, rather than writing a book that could easily be censored by anyone, saying that this is all bullshit, the Christians are lying, they're destroying our history, they're rewriting it, they're a bunch of proto-Orwellians, a long thesis. In their infinite genius, they scratched in code on a piece of stone in a cave under the ground the truth. And they knew it would survive because they knew that no one would notice it until many years later when people would start to read and figure it out. And that's why the Christians branded that cave as the mouth to hell. And when I climbed down into hell, what I found was heaven. I haven't been the same since. So there's another way to be a spiritual badass. You learn to talk in ciphers. The language becomes signs and symbols and not words. You learn how to talk to the subconscious person in allegory, parables, riddles, and codes. You learn to communicate with people who are at the same spiritual level as you in similar ways. We see this all the time in things like people taking the piss out of each other, sarcasm. That's a kind of a spiritual code. So you don't sit, if you have an issue with something, you don't sit there typing it away for years and years on end. You will never get a resolution. But what you do is you rebrand it into a narrative where you are no longer a victim. You see, the worst spiritual condition you can have is a sense of being a victim, that someone victimized you. Yes, someone have picked on us, so we have been damaged, but being a victim is something else. Being a victim is very, very different than being defeated. Because when you're defeated, you can fight again. Like the Rider-Waite card of the Five of Swords, there's the guy's are smirking because he's beaten the guy, but the guy is walking away. He's not dead. What he's doing is, I'll be back. So being defeated, and we all been defeated, is not the same thing as being a victim. A spiritual state is being defeated. A spiritual state is being defeated and saying, you know what? I probably deserve that ass kicking. You know what? I learned a lesson from this. These people were probably teaching me a lesson I need to learn. A victim doesn't do that. A victim becomes an energy vampire. And then the victim, it procreates its own victimhood as an addiction, and it moves it from person to person, place to place, entity to entity, because it's a parasite of feeding. A person who is defeated does not become a parasite. A person who has been defeated is learning recovery. Very different thing. So that's the second part. Stop being a victim. Stop having vendettas. Learn from these lessons. No contact ever again. Move on and let's see what happens. If you're a decent person and you get into the victim idea, you will lose energy you need for creativity. This is why people who get into this mindset, they just can't move on. They can't move on, and it amazes people who have moved on that these people can't move on. It amazes them. They don't laugh at it. They're not bothered by it. They're just amazed by it. Like, why would you want to waste all your energy on that when life has to be lived? When we've got to do this? They're desperately trying to feed because they become cannibals. That's what's happened. Cannibalism still exists. Cannibalism is a smear campaign. A smear campaign is a classic example of cannibalism. And psychic cannibalism, just like biological cannibalism, it goes nowhere. It goes nowhere. Another thing that happened to our ancestors when they gave up cannibalism is they developed funerary rites. Things like excarnation, where the body was put on a rack and was eaten by the ravens or the crows and the owls and all the other carrion. Then the bones were cleaned very hygienically, I might add, taken down and put in. The bones would then be lovingly placed in chambers. And these chambers there was a belief that the soul was waiting to be reborn, and women went in there to give birth. That's why a lot of them are shaped like they have a long tunnel into the darkness, like a cervix opening up into a womb. This is where the cruciform, this is where the Celtic cross comes from. It's the cruciform chamber just lifted up, and then you have the two chambers off the side, which is the fallopian tubes, and the chamber at the back represents the navel, where the soul of the person who's died is being reincarnated into the woman who's giving birth. That's what the shield and the gig is when she's opening her vagina in those statues. And that's what you see what happens when you give up cannibalism. You become very, very. The world becomes a magical place, and you develop superhuman levels of creativity. Well, these internet vampires, these electromagnetic jinn, they cannot create, and they never will create, and they're doomed to wander the internet like zombies in search of food. So stop being their food, and be careful not to become a zombie. Now, the final one we've had, the first one I said was no contact ever again. Just cut off your energy from other people eating it. Cannibals. The second one is learning how to communicate in signs and symbols. Signs and symbols is also satire. The man J.P. Sears is a classic example of this. He's communicating real truths through satire, and all these other funny websites like The Onion do the same. That famous Onion article where it says girl who's only capable of texting and rolling her eyes is to be euthanized. That's ironically very similar to what I'm talking about. They're telling people in a satirical way, maybe not even directly, get your daughter off that phone that she's living on 24 hours a day, because she might as well be dead. She is dead because she's been eaten alive by what's in there, or she's a predator. It's a conditional, cohesive feeding frenzy going back and forth with other pathological types. So talking signs and symbols. The bards did that. Be a bard. That's the second one. Don't attack anyone directly. Use a satire. If you have to put down someone, use a satire. Use a joke. Tell a story. Compensate. That's also very good at dealing with trauma, the idea of compensating. If you've been through a bad period and you survived, rebrand yourself as a hero who survived. That's what you are, as a hero who survived. That's a meme and a constant and an archetype all over ancient spiritual world. So the satire, transfer of information, and no contact ever again. And when you do that, you put those three together. Then you're ready to absorb spiritual information. This is why people go from guru to New Age workshop to getting druid staff up the arse inside his yurt, Celtic weekend warrior workshop, to Pleiadian channeling mystic, blah, 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 blah. Maybe those things are all good in their own way, but you cannot enter into that world because you're not spiritually badassed yet. You're just not there yet. And that's why you'll bounce from one to the other, to the other, to the other. When you have that spiritual moment, that epiphany, when you realize it's okay for me to be fucked up. Maybe I do have to work on sorting myself out. That's when you are like grasshopper in the old Kung Fu TV series. When you can walk on the rice paper, then it is time to live. That's the same idea. You've got to get yourself to a certain baseline of spirituality, and then you can go for the deep stuff. And entheogens is not the way there. Drugs are not the way there. Cannabis is not the way there. Alcohol is not the way there. Meditating is not the way there. Fucking is not the way there. When you get to that baseline halfway part, then you can begin to go forward and into the real stuff. Then you're ready to start exploring. Then you're ready to enter to learn ritual magic. Then you're ready to do all these things. But if you haven't developed your psychic firewall, learn to use no contact ever again, prevented yourself from being charmed and spellbound. We were talking about that tonight on Facebook. Zita said that these people who constantly post photographs of these politicians they hate are under the sorcerer's magic. They are. That's exactly what's going on. They're under the sorcerer's spell. And they sit there, blah, 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 blah. I hate him, I hate him, I hate him, I hate her, I hate her, I hate her. And there's better things to be doing with your life than posting the photograph of these wankers all day. It's achieving nothing except making their spell over you much stronger and therefore making them more powerful. More powerful. You see, we were put on this earth to create. We were put on this earth to build the universe. And I mean that quite literally. To build the universe. And what happens is the universe, I mean, back to the quantum matrix things I was talking at the beginning, that's almost like a wave that's crashed, that's moving in front of us. It's turbulent. It's like the Hokusai painting, the Great Wave of Japan, and the old wood print. It's jumping forward. And what we are like a surfer. This is why surfing is very spiritual, even though I don't do it. We're on that wave. And what we're trying to do, rather than responding to it, and we are responding to it, is we're also trying to change the course of it. So if something happens to push the wave one direction, we have to try and compensate to push it another. Not as a team, but as an individual. That's why you can't join these sects really and churches and do it. It's always individual. It always comes from within. And you move forward. And we're all doing that together, not as a great convergence where we all sit down there and wish for a better world. That's not going to happen, ever. The 100 Monkeys thing is bollocks. We're not monkeys. Do you know that? Next time if someone says to you, look at the 100 monkeys experiment, you turn around and say to them, do I look like a fucking chimp? Do I look like a fucking baboon? Thank you. Go away. Fuck off. Okay, that's what you say to them. That's what you say to the next person that brings the hunt. We are not monkeys any more than we are not Pavlov's dog, because we're not dogs. We're human beings. We're a very different thing. Our consciousness exploded about 1 million years ago and brought us to a magical level where we are now in charge of the stewardship of the developing universe. As incredible as that sounds, that's literally what it is. So you want to be a badass spiritual warrior? Well, now you know the answer. You do it yourself, and you do it on your own. But you cannot do it, and you cannot get there until you've reached that baseline level of spiritual competency. And you do that by no contact ever again with pathological vampires, virtual cannibals, and life cannibals. Not becoming a victim. When they fucked you over, you deal with it and you move on to make sure it never happens again. You don't join any group or organization until you've already reached that baseline level. If you're looking for something, you're at zero. If you're out there going, I'm looking for something, you're at zero. When you don't give a shit, you're there. You're spiritual. That's the ultimate thing. It's like the whole thing. What's the definition of apathy? I couldn't give a fuck. And that's what being spiritual is. So I hope you enjoyed tonight. I'll see you in a couple of weeks or so.